He came prepared to humiliate her on live television. But by the time Karoline Leavitt was done, the entire studio sat in stunned silence. Karoline wasn't new to tough interviews. She had faced hostile debates, handled sharp questions, and stood her ground in conversations meant to shake her. But this one felt different. A week ago, she received an invitation from a high-profile news program, one infamous for its confrontational style. Guests weren't just questioned, they were cornered. The host, Richard Caldwell, was a veteran journalist known for belittling younger guests, especially those who didn't align with his views. Karoline had done her research. Caldwell's strategy was clear: provoke, discredit, humiliate. It wasn't about conversation. It was about control. And tonight, she was his target. She could already hear the criticisms. Too young, too inexperienced, too ambitious. But what truly bothered her was the arrogance of men like Caldwell, who thought a smirk and a raised eyebrow could rattle her. The moment she arrived, she felt the unspoken condescension. The producer's thin smile, the assistant's hesitant nod, everything signaled low expectations. In the makeup chair, she barely listened as the stylist worked. Through the walls, Caldwell's voice wrapped up his segment, controlled and confident. Minutes later, she entered the studio. The lights were blinding, the air cold. Caldwell sat waiting, fingers drumming the desk. He stretched out her name with a smirk. "Karoline Leavitt, welcome to the show." She met his gaze. "Thanks for having me." His eyes scanned her. "You've made quite a name for yourself quickly. Some might say, too quickly." Karoline held his gaze. She had expected this. The veiled insult disguised as an observation. The attempt to plant doubt from the very first sentence. "I think experience comes from action, not just years," she said evenly. Caldwell let out a short laugh, shaking his head as if amused. "Ah, but isn't that what every young upstart says before realizing they're in over their head?" There it was, the first attempt to make her second-guess herself. Karoline didn't blink. Caldwell wasn't done. He tilted his head, fingers tapping the desk in mock curiosity. "Do you really believe you've earned a seat at this table? Or is this just another case of someone skipping the hard work and going straight for the spotlight?" The air in the studio shifted. This wasn't a conversation. It was a battle. But Karoline had never been one to back down. Caldwell leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes locked onto her like a predator sizing up its prey. She adjusted her posture, meeting his gaze. "Success doesn't have a set timeline," she said. "If someone is competent, driven, and prepared, why should they have to wait their turn?" Caldwell smirked. "That's the thing about younger generations always in a rush. Experience matters, and frankly, many would argue you haven't paid your dues." A faint chuckle came from off-camera. They expected her to stumble. She didn't. "The idea of paying dues is often used to keep people in their place," she said. "Are we talking about a waiting period? An arbitrary number of years before someone's opinion is valid? Because I don't think the world works that way anymore." Caldwell's smirk twitched. He had expected a rehearsed response, not something he couldn't dismiss. He shifted in his chair. "That sounds convenient," he said, voice laced with condescension. "People don't just wake up one day and deserve a platform." Karoline let a brief silence pass. "Wisdom comes from experience," she said. "But experience isn't just about age. It's about what you do with opportunities. Some people spend decades in a field and never push beyond the surface. Others come in and, through sheer work ethic, insight, and innovation, make an impact immediately." Caldwell chuckled. "I assume you put yourself in that second category." She tilted her head slightly. "I'll let my work speak for itself." For a split second, Caldwell's expression flickered. Just a hint of irritation. She wasn't playing into his game, but he wasn't done yet. He leaned forward, voice lowering slightly. "All right then, let's talk about credibility. Some say it's dangerously easy to build a following without real knowledge. Social media amplifies voices that, in past generations, might have been ignored for a reason. A murmur rippled through the studio. The audience wasn't just watching now. They were invested. Karoline's heartbeat stayed steady. She saw his strategy: undermine her, paint her as a product of the digital age. She didn't flinch. Funny how people in power always say that, right up until someone younger outperforms them, she said. Then suddenly it's not about skills, facts, or results. It's about credibility. The goalposts move. Caldwell's smirk didn't fade, but it felt forced. So expertise doesn't matter, he challenged. Not at all, she said smoothly. But expertise isn't exclusive to people who've done the same thing the same way for decades. Sometimes the ones asking new questions are the ones actually moving things forward. Caldwell inhaled sharply, regaining composure. His tactics weren't working. Let's talk specifics, he said, folding his hands. No decades of experience, no long leadership record. Why should anyone trust your perspective? Karoline held his gaze. People trust results. If someone is effective, if their work holds up, that speaks louder than time served. Caldwell let out a scoff. Public attention doesn't mean quality. Influence can be misleading. Karoline nodded. A few lucky breaks won't sustain anyone. Real impact does. Caldwell's smirk twitched frustration. She wasn't playing his game. But he wasn't giving up yet. Okay, he said, shifting tactics. Let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. The world has changed. We live in an era where opinions are thrown around carelessly. Where facts are, he made air quotes, interpreted however best suits the person saying them. Do you think your confidence comes from the fact that, until now, no one has really challenged you? The audience was silent, waiting. Karoline let a beat pass. People confuse confidence with arrogance, she said. I've been challenged plenty. But being questioned by people who assume they already know better. That's not a real challenge. That's just gatekeeping. Caldwell blinked. The shift in his expression was subtle, but she caught it. The real test isn't whether someone challenges me, she continued. It's whether, when they do, I hold up under pressure. Caldwell's fingers tapped against the desk, unconscious, quick. He hadn't expected that answer. All right, he said slowly. So, you believe results and resilience speak louder than time served? I do. He exhaled, nodding slightly. Then let's really put that resilience to the test. The tone shifted. He was about to play his next card, one he'd been saving. Caldwell adjusted his posture, elbows on the desk. The smirk was gone, replaced by something colder. Since you're so confident in your credibility, let's talk about why people question it. Karoline didn't respond immediately. She knew better than to rush into a trap. Caldwell didn't wait. He pulled a sheet of paper from the stack in front of him, a prop, meant to make what came next feel like fact rather than opinion. You've been accused of pushing narratives that fit your personal agenda rather than sticking to facts. Some critics suggest you avoid inconvenient details. Would you say that's fair criticism? Karoline didn't blink. He wasn't just questioning her credentials, now he was attacking her integrity. She tilted her head. That's an easy accusation to throw around when someone doesn't like what I have to say. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. So, your critics just don't like you? No, she said evenly. When people can't argue against the substance of what I say, they attack the messenger instead. It's a classic deflection tactic. Caldwell let out a slow breath. A deflection tactic, he repeated. So when people claim you ignore inconvenient facts, they're just making that up? Karoline leaned forward slightly. Here's the thing, she said. Every discussion has multiple angles. I focus on what's most relevant, just like you do. That's not deception. That's framing. If someone thinks I left something out, they're free to bring it up, and I'll address it. Caldwell's fingers curled slightly against the edge of the paper. He had expected her to flinch. Instead, she met him head-on. He tried again. Let's go beyond framing. You've built a platform on confidence, on having answers. But what happens when you're wrong? Have you ever admitted to making a mistake? The way he said it, he wanted her to falter. Karoline didn't. Of course, she said. I've been wrong before. That's part of learning. But here's the difference. When I realize I'm wrong, I don't double down. I correct it and move forward. Caldwell's jaw tightened slightly before he forced a smirk. And yet some say you never acknowledge your mistakes. Karoline smiled. Some people say a lot of things. That doesn't make them true. The audience chuckled, not at her, but at him. The balance had shifted, and he felt it. You're young, outspoken, and challenge norms. And you think criticism doesn't hold weight? That's not what I said, she replied. Criticism is valuable, but not all of it is honest. Some people just don't want to hear a perspective that challenges their own. Caldwell forced a tight smile. One last play. You're in a seat many don't think you deserve. What if they're right? Silence. Karoline met his gaze. That's the real question, isn't it? Not whether I'm competent, but whether I deserve to be here. Caldwell leaned forward slightly, latching onto the word. Exactly. Because there's a difference between being loud and being qualified, between being popular and actually earning respect. Karoline exhaled, not in frustration, but something close to amusement. She wasn't rattled. If anything, she looked stronger. Respect isn't given, Richard, she said. It's taken. The weight of those 3 words landed. Even Caldwell's smirk faltered for half a second before he recovered. You talk about qualifications, but let's be honest, she continued. Plenty in power didn't earn their spot. They were born into the right family, knew the right people, said the right things. You never questioned them. But when someone like me, who built their own platform, comes along, suddenly it's about qualifications. The audience shifted, some nodded. A few murmured. Caldwell crossed his arms. So you think you're above criticism? No, Karoline said instantly. I think criticism should be fair, but people like me are held to a different standard. We have to be twice as sharp, twice as prepared, just to get half the respect. And when we prove ourselves, the goalposts move. Caldwell's jaw tensed. You call it arrogance, she added. I call it not waiting to be given a seat at a table that was never built for me. Another murmur from the audience. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a reckoning. Caldwell exhaled. That's a strong answer, he admitted. But confidence isn't proof. If you're wrong, will you admit it? Absolutely, she nodded. But being questioned by people who've already made up their mind about that's not the same as being wrong. For the first time, Caldwell had nothing to say. The silence stretched. The audience felt the shift. Karoline waited. Nothing. The cameras captured it all. But even they hesitated, because to step in now would only confirm what everyone watching already knew. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was a moment. Karoline didn't move, didn't feel the silence. She had no need to. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do after making your point is to let people sit with it. The seconds ticked by, too long for TV, long enough for the audience at home to feel it. Caldwell's lips parted slightly, then pressed into a thin line. His hand found the stack of papers he had relied on throughout the interview, but this time, he didn't even look at them. He just lifted them and let them fall against the desk. The message was clear. He was out of moves, and Karoline, she was still right where she started, steady, unshaken. One of the producers, likely recognizing the moment for what it was, quickly gestured toward the control booth. The camera angle shifted, cutting to a wider shot, one that framed the entire studio. Caldwell sitting with his shoulders slightly tenser than before, and Karoline, unmoved, unapologetic, unstoppable. Finally, Caldwell let out a quiet, forced chuckle. "Wow," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "That's certainly one way to look at it." Karoline just smiled. And that's the lesson. The truth is, people will always question you. Not because you're wrong, but because you're different. Because you don't fit their mold. Because you didn't wait for them to approve of you before deciding to take up space. They'll challenge your credentials, your intelligence, your right to be in the room. And when that happens, you have two choices. You can shrink, apologize for existing, try to prove to them on their terms that you belong, or you can do what Karoline did. Stand your ground, stay steady, and let your presence do the talking. Because at the end of the day, people respect what they can't shake. And Karoline? She left that studio unshaken. If you've ever felt like someone was trying to put you in your place, remember this moment. Remember that your confidence isn't arrogance. Your presence isn't something to apologize for. And if you ever find yourself sitting across from someone like Caldwell, don't flinch, don't fold, and most importantly, don't let them decide if you deserve to be there. Because you already do. Subscribe for more powerful stories like this.